Right. Hello and welcome, everybody. I am Kim Klett, the Deputy Executive Director for the Educators Institute for Human Rights. Founded by teachers for teachers, EIHR supports communities recovering from violent conflict. We do this by applying lessons from the Holocaust and other egregious violations of human rights, such as the Rwandan genocide, as a starting point for teaching secondary school students about how these conflicts evolve and how to prevent them. We currently have ongoing projects and work in Rwanda, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Cambodia, Argentina, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I will be referring to a couple of those events that I have up here on the screen throughout the program, and including some links for you with resources
let's go.
Specifically on Bosnia. And we're especially proud of our partnership with PCRC, who you'll hear from later with Tatiana. And congratulations yesterday, Tatiana, on a very successful program in Sarajevo using our Holocaust and Peace Lessons from the Past for the Future manual that is specifically for Bosnian teachers. I will also share a link for lessons on Bosnia that we have partnered with the Seven Foundation, called Imagine Reflections on Peace, that goes along with our online and in-person exhibition. So we're really excited and happy to partner with the Academy again on this important webinar today as part of their Rapid Response series. And thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to chatting.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melody, and I'm so happy to be pairing with EIHR on this event. I did want, while we still have some people coming in, I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about our organization. Can everybody see my screen? So here at the Academy, we hold teacher events, and these rapid response webinars are at the heart of what we do. Just in this past year, we've held rapid responses on the unfortunate situation in Afghanistan, as well as what's going on in Ukraine, very connected to what we are talking about today. And in 2021, we've trained over 280 educators and 35,000 students. So we hope that you will become a member of the Academy and join some of our events moving forward. We've also talked about some of these different things that we've gone over are white supremacy, how to teach about Native peoples in classroom, which is, very relevant to us here in the States, and also systematic racism. So one thing that we do is we do hold these events for free, but we always need support, just like EIHR. So please consider giving a donation, and then be sure to follow us on all of our social media. And we do have some exciting upcoming events as well. We will be holding a conference on climate change action. So as part of signing up, you'll be getting our newsletters, and we hope that you keep a lookout for this event coming up as well. And I would like to send it over to our Executive Director, Drew Bider.
Hey, thank you, Melody. And thank you for being, putting this event together today, along with our wonderful partners around the world with EIHR. And, for those of you who are new to the Academy and EIHR families, both these organizations have roots in Buffalo, New York, which of course you all know was the tragic site of a mass shooting around 24 hours ago at the hand of a young white supremacist. And we know for our partners who are on the screen from Africa and Europe, you're no stranger to violence and recovering from violence. And we're going to need your help. One person who has been on the forefront of leading the world towards recognizing genocide and spotting the signs of it before it happens is our host today, John Heffernan, who is board chair of EIHR, as well as many things that are too long to list, but I'll try to mention a few that are relevant to understanding his gravitas in leading this conversation. He's also, 20 to 30 years ago, John has led some of the most cutting edge discussions and, more importantly, systemic change efforts to prevent genocide and to respond to its aftermath. And these are included him leading the largest humanitarian relief project for the International Rescue Committee during the Bosnian War, founding the Coalition for International Justice, a DC-based NGO that was established to assist the war crimes tribunals in the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. He ran the Committee on Conscience for the United States Holocaust Museum and founded the Genocide Prevention Task Force with Madeleine Albright and others. He's led presidents in the discussion of genocide. He's an honorary Buffalonian, and what's wonderful is that he was responsible for training so many of the people, including myself, that you'll be hearing today. John is an honorary Buffalonian and someone who's been to our fair city many times. Thank you for leading this conversation today. And, you know, we're looking forward to you interviewing the panelists and what we can learn to respond to hate. Thanks.
Thank you, Drew, very much, and welcome everybody. And after Tony's heartfelt words, I think it's hard for all of us to sort of come to grips with what just happened in Buffalo. And for those of us who've been working on issues like genocide and hate and evil forever, it just sort of boggles the mind. And I always used to say when I worked at the Holocaust Museum that our job was to give meaning to that phrase, never again. And I think what happened in Buffalo yesterday just reinforces the fact that we all need to just step it up. There's obviously so much more that can be done. So Tony, thank you for your solidarity, and Drew, thank you for your kind words. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. I've worked in the area of Bosnia for many, many years, as Drew said, going back to gosh, when was it? 1990, when I was there with the International Rescue Committee running their relief operation in Zagreb, Beograd, Sarajevo, Tuzla, all over the former Yugoslavia. And regrettably, we're still here to talk about it. So let's think about what we can do to give meaning to that phrase, never again. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today. I have to say, unfortunately, one of our panelists, Alma, is not able to make it because she came down with COVID. But our heart goes out to her, and our prayers for good health and a quick and speedy recovery. But we are fortunate enough to have three panelists, one being Kim Klett, who introduced herself earlier. Kim is the Deputy Director of Educators Institute for Human Rights. And along with that, she has been a teacher for nearly 30 years, teaching both English and Holocaust and genocide studies. Kim, welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you. And we also have Tatiana, I'm gonna try Tatiana, Milanovic.
Yep. That's a very common mistake, but you were very close. Hi, everyone. My name is Tatiana Milovanovic, but good try.
Milovanovic, there you go. I apologize. And Tatiana is the program director for the Post-Conflict Research Center in Sarajevo. She holds a master's degree in transitional justice, human rights, and rule of law from the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights. And she holds a master's also in democracy and human rights from the University of Sarajevo and the University of Bologna, and a law degree from University of East Sarajevo. Wow, that's fantastic. We look forward to hearing from you as well. And last but not least, we have Amra Sabish El Rais, who is a professor and award-winning author, an activist. She grew up in Bihać, Bosnia-Herzegovina. She's a professor at Columbia Teacher College, and her award-winning memoir, The Cat I Never Named, A True Story of Love, War, and Survival, is one that we should all take note of and hopefully read. And I'd like to have Amra start by reading an excerpt from her book that I think is totally relevant to this discussion today and what we have just been talking about in terms of what's happened in Buffalo in the last 24 hours. So Amra.
Thank you, John, very much. I have to say, first, Tony, I send my love to you specifically in your community and all of you who are with us today. It takes time, emotions, and effort, and a true commitment to be focused on work aimed at preventing hate, particularly when we are so frequently disappointed with the different kinds of violence that continues to occur around the world. So I appreciate your resilience and willingness to be here. I'm going to share with you a scene from a moment where I find myself as a teen deciding to cross the main bridge in my hometown of Bihać in the midst of the war without telling my parents, because I wanted to go and tell a friend of mine that the school was going to be in session. During the nearly 4 years of siege of Bihać, we didn't have regular schooling. So schooling was a rarity that as young individuals we appreciated, and we were willing to lose our lives in order to be together and be educated. Then I hear whistling overhead, a thin, reedy sound. An instant later, I see a flash as a missile hits a house on the bank of the Una, on my home side of the bridge. The sound of the explosion comes an instant later, and I stand frozen. Bizarrely thinking about physics, about the relative speed of light and sound that cleaves the experience in two. First, the sight of fire and flame, then disconnected by a second or two, sound waves that roll over me like messengers eager to bear bad news. I hear another missile overhead, launched from the mountains surrounding our town. Someone told Tata, who told me in turn, the bomb that you hear is not the one with your name on it. If you hear it whistle, it is because it's flying over your head to somewhere else. You never hear a whisper from the bomb that kills you. The air raid siren starts its high-pitched howl then. We have no radar, nothing to tell us that missiles are inbound, so the siren is a joke. It just serves to remind us that people are being killed. It gives no warning, just wails and mourns with the rest of us. Davor and I find each other again. We're still frozen in place, not knowing if we're about to die, but our eyes meet across the bridge. Between us, I see the mother and her little boy, the little girl in the green sweater, a trio of middle-aged women who look like sisters. Davor takes a step toward me. Then the air seems to be sucked out of the world as I'm hit with an earth-shattering, deafening explosion. There's flash between Davor and me, and I'm blinded. Metal and stone are flying around me. I turn to run, and it's only when my legs are moving that I realize I'm not dead. I only make it a few steps before I fall, scraping my knees. In the dust and chaos, I hear screams, and I drag myself to my feet, stunned. My ears are ringing, and the air is choked with dust. I smell smoke. I taste smoke. There's grit on my tongue. The blue bridge is still standing. The bomb struck a glancing blow that didn't do anything much to the structure, but the pedestrians on the bridge. Against every survival instinct, I make myself walk back towards the other end of the bridge. I look all around, but don't see Davor. The little boy, the one who wanted to look at fish over the side of the bridge, is standing in the middle of a cloud of masonry dust. His mouth is open, and at first I think the sound he's making is part of the loud ringing in my ears, because everything sounds weirdly muffled at first. The sounds are returning to my ears one at a time. Then I realize he's screaming a long, drawn-out, terrible cry that stops only when he's out of breath, then starts again after a ragged gasp. I go to him. He's blonde, tousled-haired, and blue-eyed, just like Dino when he was younger. But his little face looks impossibly old. I wish he could be confused. I wish he didn't know exactly what just happened. But this little boy understands his loss and he's suffused with helpless, inarticulate rage. I go to him, reaching out my hand. He just stares at me with his prematurely aged face. I look beyond him, blood on a stylish suit. The fox fur collar made from a whole fox. Its sharp white teeth grinning as it grasps its own tail. Its black glass eyes are staring at me. Above that, nothing. There's nothing where his mother's head should be. He finds words now and his screams turn into a desperate wail for his mother. He's not looking at her, but he must have seen. He's calling to her like his words could turn back time, undo the bomb. Like if he begs the universe loudly enough, he can make his mother alive again. I take his little hand and he looks at me like I'm an alien thing. I tried to lead him off the bridge, but he's like a boulder, immovable. All this time, he never stopped screaming his feral fury against the world. An old man staggers beside us. A couple clings to each other as they walk through the smoke. Though it's midday, the smoke and dust make it look like a foggy evening. Survivors are like ghosts in the haze. I still don't see Davor. Not among the bodies or the survivors. The little boy's grief shatters me. There's nothing I can do. So I leave him. It's a wrenching decision, but someone will come to help him. I look at the other people on the bridge. The three middle-aged sisters are strewn about like old clothes. That's what I see. Their old lady sweaters and their sensible shoes. A man is hanging half of the bridge draped over the rail. Blood is dripping in a puddle at his feet. Then I see the girl in the green sweater like mine. She's on the ground, curled on her side, facing away from me. Her sweater is perfectly clean and tidy, like she just decided to take a nap in this odd place. I think she's unconscious. Maybe she was knocked out by the shock wave. I kneel at her side and take her shoulder, gently turning her over as I say, "Don't worry, I'm here, I'll help you." I roll her and find a bloody horror. The front of her body is stripped of clothes, stripped of skin, shredded from a hail of metal and stone shrapnel. From the front, she doesn't look human. She looks like meat. I scream and scramble backward on my hands and feet like a crab. Wiping my bloody hands on the ground, they make a red paste with the dust. I roll to my knees, haul myself to my feet, look around for somebody, anybody who can do something. Suddenly, there are lights up ahead in the middle of the road where we're walking. It's a big square white lorry with tall blue letters on the side. UN. The United Nations is supposed to be here to help the suffering, to facilitate peace. With a gasp of relief, I run to meet the truck, waving my hand to stop them. "Help is here," I shout to the little boy as I pass him. "These men will help you." I'm standing in the middle of the road, right in the truck's path. It slows. The driver sees me. He meets my eye. "Please have medics, I think. Please have some kind counselor who can take care of this poor child. Please have someone to compassionately tend to that poor girl's body, to cover her ravaged face." But the UN truck swerves around me, increasing speed. Okay, I think they're going to the wounded in the center of the bridge, but the truck doesn't stop. It drives fast enough to make the damaged bridge shake. It swerves carefully around the carnage and rubble and carries on as if dead Bosnians weren't sprawled on the streets. The world is watching and it doesn't care. Thank you.
Thank you, Amra. Those last words resonate. The world is watching and it doesn't care. And it's beautifully written. So let's move on. This is a segue into the discussion that we're having today about warning signs in Bosnia as the world watches. I think it's important to reiterate what the goal is here. think we want to be able to come out of this with a better understanding of what those warning signs are in Bosnia. But more importantly, what I would like to come out of this is with some type of strategy, some methodologies, some type of tools that we as citizens of the world, as we as educators, as we as parents can share with others about those warning signs and how we can prevent and stop what might evolve into a conflict, so that we don't have to have people like Amra writing those words once again about what's happening in Bosnia. So I'm going to pass it on to our panelists, and why don't we start with Tatiana, and if all of you could just briefly give us your take on what you think the situation is in Bosnia. Are we on the brink of another humanitarian disaster? Are we on the brink of another conflict? What's happening in Ukraine? Does this sort of open up the avenues, if you will, for additional aggression in the former Yugoslavia? So why don't we start with Tatiana? Tatiana, just real briefly, tell us what your take is on the current situation.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who expressed interest in today's event. It's really great to be with such a wonderful crowd of people, and thank you for separating several hours on a Sunday. In Bosnia, it's a Sunday night. To talk about something that's definitely not an easy subject to open up. Yeah, I think as Jeff introduced me at the beginning, so I represent Post-Conflict Research Center, and we are a grassroots women-led peace-building organization and center. We're based in Sarajevo, but we work in Bosnia and several programs across the region, so the Western Balkan region or the countries of the former Yugoslavia. We started our work some over 10 years ago, maybe, and when we started, we firstly advocated for more programming on peace and genocide prevention. And at the time, most people, including civil society organizations and maybe other stakeholders, were considered us, to say at least, strange, a little bit ridiculous, because as we were advocating for prevention of violence, stating how that's not something we need because it's just been, a little bit over 10-15 years after the violence has ended. So why do we need to prevent anything? Stating that there's more pressing issues. Unfortunately, what the Russian aggression on Ukraine has reminded everyone in Bosnia is just how fragile peace is in all contexts where historical grievances and traumatic past was not resolved, and how working on peace and prevention of hatred and violence is a job and responsibility of all actors, including local governments, international community, and that it's a job that never stops. And it has been, for us as civil society, very, very difficult to advocate for this last thing, so that building peace or working on preventing different sort of steps that lead to violence is not something that ever just happens and stops. It's a job that that should keep developing. And the ongoing aggression in Ukraine has brought back, first of all, very painful memories of the Bosnia and Balkan past. And our center right now is looking into best ways of amplifying messages of peace in the country, and also assisting colleagues in Ukraine in short and long term. We are, I wouldn't say, the question of whether we're at the brink of war, I think when I started working with the Post-Conflict Research Center, which was about 10 years ago, I was already getting those type of questions. because there have been signs of things going wrong, not necessarily things leading to violence, but we are definitely aware that if some sort of violence is to happen, we are not sure if we have enough mass to stop that. And I don't mean in terms of military grade, I mean enough education among people, enough empathy, and enough morally courageous individuals that will just not take up arms at first. And as I said, we've been dealing with these questions for a while now. Unfortunately, the aggression on Ukraine has sort of made us see just how maybe easy and how there is like an easy trigger there. And then also the aggression has also shown us just how big Russian influence is in Bosnia and the Western Balkan region. We've seen that on the examples of our politicians, some of the leading politicians in Bosnia, but then also the politicians in Serbia, and just how much, unfortunately, support there is for aggressors still. Now, the reasons for that are usually, both economical and some sort of ideological reasons, but they exist, and they are more frightening at this point than anything else. That, as I said, we just don't have. We don't seem to have enough power, or we would not have enough strong resilience to the potential of violence. And our work, and I mean, we can speak about this later, goes exactly into that, goes into peace education and providing services for Bosnian citizens, mostly focusing on youth, as to how to become more resilient to violence, hatred, and divisions. So yeah, thank you. And again, here I hope also that we can have an open and honest discussion as we move forward.
Great. Thank you very much, Tatiana. Kim.
Well, I'll come from an educational standpoint, working with teachers, working with PCRC in Bosnia and other organizations, that's where we're really trying to affect some change. And, we see that the students, I think, and teachers are really interested in, okay, how can we move forward and how can we teach honest history? And I think that's a big part of it. And so just getting into the classrooms, getting materials into the hands of teachers. As I mentioned, there was a big program yesterday that Tatiana was a part of, and PCRC that really, and I'll put the link in the chat box. Sorry, but really getting to the heart of the issue of, making sure that the students are getting an honest history. And I can't help but also see, connections to here in the US as well, that, the way different subjects are taught in different places, we see the same thing in Bosnia probably to a greater extent, but getting to that history where students can look at it and have a common history. The way it is now with having, the three different kind of regions, so difficult to teach the same history and an honest history to all students. And we've seen that in the work that we've done in Bosnia when we had programs where Tatiana remembers this at a program in 2018 that we did there in Sarajevo, and we had a student who said, a high school student who said that he had to leave his own country. He went to Germany and studied there. And he said that that's where he learned his own country's history. And so it's just interesting to think about the different approaches. And so, yes, looking at peace education, looking at ways that teachers can introduce this. And that's where EIHR, we often start with the Holocaust and that history and looking at that to give us that common ground. And we've certainly made inroads with that in Bosnia. And, I think that's a good way to go forward, but we need to get it to where the teachers feel more confident and comfortable talking about their own history.
Thanks, Kim. Amra?
Well, I appreciate both Tatiana's and Kim's reflections. There's so much that I could just respond to each sentence or idea that they had shared. But to go back to your original question on whether we are on the brink of another conflict, I unfortunately do think that we are. I believe that often in the Balkans, things that are whispered elsewhere are screamed in the Balkans. We're sort of this microcosm that's reflection of larger geopolitics, and the world is in a fragile moment. The United States is in a fragile moment. I've written a number of pieces from scholarly articles on how people radicalize and grow up to become hate-filled individuals, and in scholarly publications, but also in Education Week and for Al Jazeera in opinion pieces, often comparing some of the trends that have happened in former Yugoslavia in terms of building the hate-filled narrative prior to the breakup and then ultimately leading to the Bosnian genocide. And I see some of those narratives happening in the United States. So when the United States as the superpower is in this moment of paralysis to solve its own divisions and its own issues with racism and targeted violence as the horrific act of violence that Buffalo experienced yesterday, it becomes a signal to individuals around the world who are looking to initiate other conflicts that this is the moment, that this is the opportune time to take the land, to promote the political ideology that in a way dehumanizes or others a particular group, because it is a source of the sort of supremacy identity that often drives these types of conflict. And that we're seeing over the last 10 months, I would say, in Bosnia, the kind of escalation that we have not seen in prior years. Republika Srpska leadership, Milorad Dodik has talked about succession over and over, dividing Bosnia, has propagated anti-Muslim racism for many years, but it has now escalated to the level where there is a moment of new trauma being inflicted throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina. I published The Cat I Never Named in September of 2020, and I have to say I published it as a warning against hate in America, not anticipating that fast forward some 2 years later, I would be concerned about what will happen again in Bosnia. And I'll just share this detail. I recently completed a chapter for I think first book in the United States, published as an edited, will be published by the end of the year as an edited volume on Bosnian studies. And my contribution to that publication was a chapter that actually analyzed the social media public commentary and engagements that I've had with largely Bosnian community. And when I say Bosnian community, I mean virtual Bosnian community, because more of us live, particularly second and third generation, live abroad than we live than in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I've had more than 4 million unique, as Facebook would call them, unique users visit my page and engage with me. Hundreds of thousands of people over the last 2 years who've written to me. And I would say that 90% of those communications are people who are in a state of complete fear that their families are going to go through the same kind of genocidal, horrific violence that Bosnia experienced in 1990s. I had individuals write to me that they will hang themselves because if the war happens again, they cannot live through it again. I have an uncle in his 90s who lived through World War II and has memories of that pain and trauma, has obviously survived military siege of my hometown of Bihać together with us, and we used to share one tiny apple amongst 20 family members just so we can have a taste of it. And here we are again. When I speak to him, he's in tears and says, Amra, will it happen again? And so I'm sorry if I sound alarming, but I do think that the only way we can prevent it again from happening is if the world begins to act preventively. We tend to intervene. We're intervening now when things are happening in Ukraine. We intervened after 4 years of atrocities in Bosnia. We engaged with Afghanistan and then abandoned it and left the country to its own devices without really acting preventively through education. And so Kim and Tatiana, as both of you have said, education is this mechanism that's incredibly powerful, but I do think it's invisible to political actors and policymakers. They tend to not engage education in prevention because they think it takes a long time and they think it's difficult to bring tough topics into classrooms. I think my message, if everything else that I shared today is forgotten, my message to all of you as educators is that you are really the individuals that are critical in preventing violence by bringing stories that can evoke empathy in the classrooms. Because if students have to travel to another country to learn their own history, we have a problem, and we will see it occur in Bosnia or elsewhere in the United States again.
Thank you, Amra. So for 10 years, I ran a human rights education program for the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights called Speak Truth to Power. And I'm a firm believer that education can prevent genocide, and it does take a while. There's an incredible quote from the former High Commissioner of Human Rights who came to the Holocaust Museum about 10 years ago, and he said that, and I'm paraphrasing, that 9 out of 15 planners of the Holocaust, architects of the Holocaust, have had PhDs. And then he went on to talk about how, an education void of civic engagement, void of human rights, void of what we need to be talking to our kids about can be hugely problematic, as we saw in the Holocaust. So we're talking about all these incredible interventions, and you're all engaged in these interventions to prevent genocide at the end of the day. But my question is, and something I've struggled with my whole life, is how do you institutionalize something like that? How do you make it systemic? How do you make it so that it's just not, the people on this call, and certainly far more than this, that are involved in those types of interventions? And so I'd like each one of you to address that. How can, for instance, here in the United States, we make it a requirement that all public school children learn about what happened in the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s, or learn about the Holocaust, or the human rights education, call it what you want it, Holocaust education, be something that is embedded into our curriculum. Why don't we start with you, Kim?
Yeah, I think that probably everybody on this webinar today would totally agree with that. It's getting that into place that, it's such a difficulty so often. And so whether we're looking at mandates, like even here in the United States, to teach about the Holocaust and other genocides, even the states that do, and several do now. In fact, where I live in Arizona, we just got one this past year, a mandate. But if it isn't funded, and if it isn't specific to what it's asking teachers and students to do, it often can be really difficult. And so, and then we're also fighting some parents and people who think that, critical race theory is being taught in our schools and all of these issues. And so it's really difficult because, and I know in Bosnia, it's the same thing. Sometimes when we try to teach these lessons, we hit these barriers that are really difficult to overcome. And so, it's exactly like Amra said, it takes time. It's a slow process. But I think you're absolutely right. It does need to happen. Just what does that look like in each place, and how do you enact it? How do you make sure that happens? How do you confront those barriers, whether it's parents or school boards or politicians or whoever it might be, to overcome that? And so sometimes it feels, I know as a teacher myself, it feels like, we take a couple steps forward and then several steps back, which makes it even more difficult.
Thanks. Tatiana?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely not one solution and formula, but I can tell you a little bit about what our center has been trying to do, sort of merging the civil society work, the non-formal with more formal education and more institutional work. A couple of things that we've learned. First of all, we're very aware, and we have become more and more aware. I think once we started working with HR back in 2014-15, we started working with this group of teachers from all around Bosnia, and our primary goal was, to create some sort of history curricula that will, of course, talk about Bosnian war and stuff.
That's sort of one common history that Kim was talking about.
Yes. But we realized very early on that, unfortunately, due to the ongoing political situation, and I say ongoing, it has been ongoing for many years, not just these last one or two. There has not been, you probably know, there's not, sort of an agreed historical narrative among even in our society, to what has happened in the 90s. And so we realized that will be tricky. We even if we create some sort of teaching curricula, chances are that the teachers won't be able to adopt it into schools. And PCRC is, we've been aware of those challenges very early on, from the beginning of our work back in 2010. And so we decided to focus on another part that touches upon the conflict of the 90s, genocide and war. And we created one of our main peace education programs. It's called Ordinary Heroes, and that tells stories of moral courage, or people who have helped or saved someone during the war and genocide who was not of their ethnic group or religion or such. So we've decided to focus on these human stories in a way. And then we've applied this methodology for most of our programming. So we, in addition to the Ordinary Heroes, we've developed, for example, programming that specifically talks about sexual violence in conflict and women who have, survived rape and sexual violence. But we've again taken, personal narratives of those women. And we've realized from the beginning of our work that everyone, including young people, respond much better when they're confronted with an individual human story, instead of maybe, previously written historical narrative of this happened, this and there. Then we decided to add another layer onto this, and that is not to only and always focus on, Bosnia. So in most of our programming, we utilize stories from Bosnia, but we also utilize stories from around the world, of not obviously the same, from different contexts, but very similar and horrific crimes that have happened. So for example, for Ordinary Heroes, we talk about also Holocaust, Cambodia, Rwanda, and for different programmings, we've sort of chosen different contexts. And we realize that also people respond very nicely to this, because especially in Bosnia, people kind of get tired of listening that only their country went through this horrific war and nothing has worked ever since then and everything is horrible. So giving them more of a global approach and way of positioning their own country and their own self, and this also helped. And thirdly, when it comes to the stories from Bosnia especially, we've tried to, wherever we can, to have sort of balance of stories. So to have stories of all different communities, including 3 main ethnic groups and minorities, which means for Bosnia, mostly members of the Jewish and Roma communities. And so when we started, for example, Ordinary Heroes, what we did is we went into different local communities in Bosnia. When you go to local communities, you need to work with local governments there to gain any sort of permissions to go into school or to go even to a public square and exhibit your photos, any of that. And we have, from the beginning, have been able to enter schools, but also enter public squares or galleries because we utilize this approach. So it was as balanced as an objective as we can. When we did use historically accurate facts, we were very careful on making them researched and sourced, and we used as our main points, judgments from ICTY and the Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina, talking about explicit points and sourcing it properly. And then in terms of methods, we decided to utilize more artistic methods, so utilizing photography, utilizing documentary. So we do produce photography exhibitions and documentary movies. So trying to make this content more than just we're going to come somewhere or we're going to create something that's just a very dry piece of paper for someone to read. And then in the last about 4 or 5 years, we've been also trying to find ways to work with local governments and also institutions of memory in Bosnia. When it comes to the institutions of memory, so far the only state public memorial for the 1990s war is the Srebrenica Genocide Memorial. So we've been trying to work with the memorial to improve their capacity. Since as a state-led institution, they're usually underfunded and underdeveloped, and they were sort of forgotten up until a couple of years ago a little bit. So we've been also trying to build up their capacity and trying to sort of find ways to enter with our content. As in Bosnia, we say through the small doors or na mala vrata. And then in addition to that, I think Kim has mentioned our programming and the new teaching manual that we've created that's called Holocaust and Peace. And we were very sneaky in that because we were working with these teachers trying to talk about Bosnia, but we realized we can't name something, Bosnian War and Genocide and Peace and expect it to go into schools. So we put as our base teachings of the Holocaust, and sort of the historical ground is the Holocaust. But then in the teaching manual, there's a lot of lessons that focus on Bosnia and the Bosnian experience. Again, trying to utilize more of these like methods that I've mentioned and topics, so trying to focus on personal stories rather than any sort of finger blaming or anything like that. And so the teaching manual, even though it's Holocaust and Peace, has a lot of stories and has a lot of facts as well, and talks about the Bosnian War and Genocide, just sort of maybe not trying to do it that directly so much, to allow our teachers the flexibility. So if they do have the possibility to teach this in their schools, it might be easier to get it through, through the directors and through all the political influences that they have. And I do have to say, since we had the training yesterday, we had a very, very great interest from teachers in Bosnia, and we're hoping we will roll it out even more, that people are ready to take this into their schools. And they do see the need. We were kind of worried that the teachers won't see the need. Since they do have a lot of pressures in their work, they do see it, and we're hoping to work our way into schools.
Thanks, Tatiana. So it's about being creative and finding the holes, and then really going from there. We're about out of time, but I want to give Amra, before we move into Q&A, and I'm sorry about that because this is an incredibly rich conversation. There's so much more that can be said. Can we have a sequel? Let's do the version 2 of this. But Amra, tell us a little about how how you feel that we can make this more systemic in nature, all these interventions, this great work that's being done right now, how can it become more structural and institutionalized?
I think it's a whole society approach. And I think for me as an educator at the Graduate School of Education, the first question that I often ask is how diverse are the teachers who are teaching teachers, right? How informed and educated are faculty members at the graduate schools of education in the United States on these issues, because it is a faulty expectation and often burden placed on teachers at K through 12 level to sort of come up with all of this content and curriculum without having the appropriate training to discuss these topics. I often get invited to conversations on tough topics, difficult conversations, and I say my life is not a difficult conversation, or it's not a tough topic. It should be a normal topic in any context, but we don't have the skill sets, competencies, resources that we offer to educators that are, I think, necessary for them to train then thousands of 3.5 million or 3 million of educators in the United States. And so starting with really training at the highest level, if you will, and then ensuring that it is normalized throughout the curricula and coursework. I teach a number of courses at Columbia where I engage students actually on, so my graduate students, master's and doctoral students, on hands-on projects. So this semester, for instance, we did a project where we developed a board game for children who are 5 to 10 to build their resilience to hate. Last semester, I worked with them on creating a project that was focused on high school students globally. So we were in Malaysia, in China, in the United States. And so one is to offer theory, but then the second aspect is to kind of give the tools and practices to future educators to be able to then transition into the classroom and bring those toolkits with them. And I'll share another resource that is available to all of you and that I've developed, understanding this lack of professional training on these issues. You're here willingly and committed on a Sunday, but most teachers don't get exposed to these types of conversations. And so I worked I've been working for the last 6 months or so, and will continue for the next 2 years on a professional training called Reimagine Resilience. You can go to reimagineresilience.org. It is a project that is based on my empirical work done internationally on how hate emerges and what is the role of learning as a person transforms from being an ordinary teen to now suddenly someone who commits an act of violence. And so based on that understanding, I have developed a model called educational displacement model of radicalization, or educational displacement theory of radicalization, that in essence argues that if we fail to address grievances or the need to address certain topics in the classrooms with young individuals, and we can't do it well, they will seek alternative spaces of belonging and alternative spaces for conversation. In the same way that you as educators want to learn on these issues that we're discussing today, if you can't get that in your place of work, you are seeking other opportunities and platforms where you can sort of satisfy that need and curiosity. Unfortunately, with young people, if we fail to discuss racism, hate in different forms in the classroom, genocide, they'll go online, they'll go on Twitter and social media, and that is where they're radicalized. So the individual who committed the mass shooting yesterday in Buffalo, from what I have been, obviously investigation is underway, but from what I've been able to see online, is someone who, according to what I read, again, don't cite me on it, is that he was extremely bored and isolated during COVID and went on to then search certain outlets online and started his radicalization. But imagine if we had projects that build resilience to hate that were available to an individual like that. Maybe we could have changed the trajectory of what had happened. And that's where prevention in the classroom through storytelling and empathy evoking that you are doing is critical. And I am just going to say this, that for those of you who are interested in the program that I mentioned, Reimagine Resilience, it is funded by an innovation grant that I have won from the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships within Department of Homeland Security. So it's a federal grant of $750,000 that I won last year, one of 5 innovation grants, because professional training programs do not exist on prevention of radicalization and extremism that are offered to teachers nationally. And so because of the grant, I'm going to be able to launch this program. I have an entire research team who's working with me in probably by the end of this summer, and we will be able to make it available for free to educators in the United States. We can work with your institutions. We have funding to come to a limited number of visits that we can make to certain institutions. If we can train the entire institution and they're open to it, we will do that. And the training will provide educators with Columbia University certification, but also continuing education units, CLTs, if you are in New York State as well. So that is one way or pathway through which I have tried to influence sort of the process of institutionalizing and normalizing these conversations by building resilience to hate. We'll never be able to eliminate every hate narrative. They're going to be there, out there. But what we can do is build resilience through education within young individuals so that when someone calls for violence, they can say, I'm not interested, I know better. And I'll stop there, and I'll drop in the chat a link for all of you so that you can reach out to me if you're interested in the program.
Great, thank you, Amra. Why don't we have about 20 minutes left, and let's devote that to Q&A. I know, Melody, are you still on? I don't see you. Oh, there you are. Hi. Hi. So you're going to moderate the Q&A, right?
Yeah, so I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to put their questions in the chat. And I actually have one to start us off. And then after that, if somebody wants to ask their question personally, please just use the raise hand feature so we can call you forward. If you're not comfortable doing that, perfectly fine. Leave it in the chat and we'll be able to ask it from there. But I will get everything started. So I think one thing any educator always has as a barrier, it's not only the barrier of getting this into the classroom, but kind of that second barrier I think that all of us have experienced is the naysayers. You know, even in what the Academy does with our youth program in the summer, we'll be teaching on certain international topics or even topics within here, and I'll have a parent, come up to me at the end, why are you teaching about that? That's not important, that's not happening here, or even if it is happening here, like, oh, that's not true. So I think the naysayers is always an important barrier and a skill that we need to learn how to overcome those. So do any of our panelists, maybe start with Kim, have any advice on, language or things we can do as we're pushing, teaching about Bosnia in our classrooms for any of those naysayers that may say that this is not important, or even people within Bosnia that are, fighting against this sort of education? Where do we go to combating those voices?
Right, yeah, and I think one of the things is that's where it's important to make connections, to show that there are connections between what we are talking about in, for example, Bosnia, and things that are happening here as well. Am I able to share again? I was going to show a picture. If not a big deal. But I'll give you an example. Alma, oh, okay, thank you. Alma Jero, who was going to be on our webinar today, just spoke with my students on Friday, actually, and she talked about a lot of issues, but one of them that resonated with my students is the 2 schools under one roof system of segregation. And my students were appalled by this. That you have a school for Bosniak students here and one for Croats here. and how everything is taught differently. And that really bothered my students. And then we started talking about, well, wait a minute, is the history in the US taught the same all the time? No, of course not. There was that article recently about the textbooks, same textbook company, but, in Texas and California, the history of enslavement was very different, right? In the same textbook company and their books. So I think making connections like that is really important. And then also thinking about, with the two schools under one roof, thinking about the importance of looking at kind of what Tatiana was saying with the ordinary heroes, bringing it back to that level of, this is something that maybe we don't feel like it affects us, but individuals can speak up against and about. And so, for example, we were talking in my classroom on Friday about, and I'm probably not saying this right, but Giace and the students there in Bosnia who protested the two schools under one roof in, I think it was like back in 2016. And actually we're successful with that. And so looking at not only the individual stories, but also the voices that our students can have, and again, kind of empowering them with that through those connections that we can make.
Did any other panelists have anything else to add before I bring in the next question?
No, I would like to add this sort of interesting experience that I've had in discussing the cat I never named in American schools and globally, which is often a question that I get either from teachers themselves or from students or other audiences, and that is that I don't look like a Muslim. I don't look like what they see in their head as a preconceived notion based on the stereotypes that exist in the United States and the Western world. The recent UN research has shown that Islamophobia is in essence, that there's an epidemic, global epidemic of anti-Muslim sentiments and bias. And so, but when people get to hear one story, and they learned that I was a teen who loved volleyball, that I was falling in love, that I had a pet that really helped me get through trauma and depression and difficulty, mental difficulty and physical survival during the worst years of my life, they suddenly feel that connectedness, Kim, that you talked about. And they sort of forget, what is the stereotype that came from media? What is the sort of image of a terrorist Muslim or an educated, voiceless, silent Muslim woman? Because I no longer fit into that othering narrative that is often present, that they might have been exposed in other social contexts. And so building that one-on-one interaction and storytelling, which both Tatiana and Kim have mentioned, is that first step towards opening a door. And perhaps it might be a small door, but then it becomes a bigger door. In my experience, it has been that when I've gone to speak to schools once, they invite me next year, and now it's a bigger audience. And now I'm at an assembly, not only in one classroom. That sort of impact has a magnifying effect, because then they go home, they speak to their parents. Then I get emails from their parents who say, well, I have a book club. Would you like to come and have a conversation with us? And after a while, you disarm that humanity that connects us, disarms that bias that is implicit or in some cases explicit. And I want to say that what's very important in these tough conversations is not to be judgmental. When someone approaches me and says something, but wait, all the Muslims are terrorists, that's all I know. I don't find it, it is hurtful, but I don't find it as a door closing to a conversation. I find it as an invitation to engage in a conversation. Not an invitation for anger, not an invitation for frustration, but for nonviolent dialogue that is necessary if we're going to move ahead and be able to see each other as we are, unique, different, special in our own ways, and all worthy of life and respect.
Thank you so
and
much.
maybe-
Sorry.
Sorry. Maybe I can, and I think it's kind of connected to one of the questions that's already there. We've sort of all touched upon it about sort of what happens or how do you act when someone maybe reacts negatively to your content in the moment, or maybe even more aggressively and such. And I mean, obviously I've personally had experiences like that as well. When it comes to Bosnia, the word genocide can be a trigger to a lot of people to express certain emotions. I've had, let's say, for example, there were students at one of our activities. We started talking, and it was in Bosnia, we say mixed group, meaning that there were people from, different ethnic backgrounds. And we came to the topic of Srebrenica and the genocide, and certain youth had an issue with it, especially then we gave them a spot to talk. Their biggest issue in the end was with the number of people that the Srebrenica genocide that's used in the Srebrenica genocide context. It's over 8,000 people who were mostly men and boys who were killed, and so we let them express their feelings and talk. And in the end, as we walked them sort of through slowly, it ended up being that they do not have an issue with the number. They just are not able to grasp it because it's too huge of a number for their heads to be real. And so it was easier in a way to, think about, it couldn't have happened, because how do you murder so many people in relatively short period of time? It just can't be real. So it's got to be the lie or not truth. And then we talked, and then we talked about what if the number is 1,000 people? Is that still horrible? And such. Then we talked about what genocide means and why do we use that word and maybe not some other word for it, and such. And in the end, there was a sort of, maybe not necessarily their agreement, but their more understanding. And I think one way also is that to try not to come as, in any classroom or in any group, as someone who's there to change their opinions on anything. If you start with that energy, giving out that, something is wrong and we're correcting it, you usually get a lot more naysayers because people don't like to be told that they're not right. However, if you approach it from a way, okay, these are some of the facts that we have, and these are maybe, as I was saying from the beginning, personal stories and narratives of people, and now let's see how do we react to those sides. So that's a little bit of our experience.
Thank you. So we do have a little bit of time for a couple more questions. I do see, sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly, Violetta, if you wanted to come forward and ask your question.
Yes, hi everyone. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
We can hear you.
Yeah, first I want to apologize because I'm having some technical issues and my camera is not working, but I have been here for this whole webinar. I have more than just one question, and I don't think I'm not sure if I can ask just one question. I will start with saying that I am also a high school teacher working at 2 schools under one roof school. I'm sure you're all very familiar with this problem that we have in our society. What I wanted to share with everyone, and especially with the author of The Cat I Never Named, is I have used your book. I have used it in a way that even though no one at school, the principal and administrators knew it, since I'm an English teacher, I brought the book to my school, and then I discussed all of the topics imaginable using the book. And I was very happy when I saw just yesterday that there is a Bosnian version of it, translation to Bosnian language. So congrats on that. What I wanted to say is that we as teachers can do tremendous work, even though it is not institutionalized in a way. So we, as individuals who are eager to make a change, we do try to make that change no matter what. And it is important to have education of teachers on these subjects, and also to have independent media, especially in rural areas. Those are very small local media, and I come from a very small rural area too. Everything, I don't mind me saying that it would be great if we could have more projects, ongoing projects in small areas and not just big cities around Bosnia and Herzegovina, because those are the areas that could possibly be very important when it comes to prevention of violence and prevention of conflict. I'm sorry I took so much time. Thank you.
If I can just say, Violetta, thank you so much for using the cat I never named. For me, the difficulty has been knowing that my book is used around the world, but not in my country of birth where the story happened. And so knowing that you're using it is deeply meaningful to me. And if I can ever be helpful and show up for your students, I don't know if that would be more of a problem or a challenge in your school, or if it would be welcomed, but I'm always willing to take that risk. I think silence is much greater risk than being an advocate for peace and prevention of violence. And I also want to acknowledge the comment that you made about rural areas. It is a challenge in the United States as well, and something that is certainly on the top of my list in terms of training that we offer, that we're going to be offering here. And I would love to, I see a lot of projects even happening and being sort of Sarajevo-centric. Sarajevo is a beautiful city. We all love Sarajevo, but it's not the only city in Bosnia. And cities are not the only relevant intervention spaces and localities in Bosnia. So I fully and wholeheartedly support your call that we need to diversify who we work with and who we reach out to.
We do have another question in the chat. Oh, it's kind of a long one. So this is from Margareta. She also asked a question earlier. I was wondering whether you had any situations when people express quite contradictory opinions or stances regarding the members of the outgroup. For example, I had a situation where I personally put a lot of effort into convincing me and other researchers that they do not hate anyone. They support their children socializing with outgroup members, but at the same time, they express rather, sorry, my thing just clicked, rather radical stances, such as I like that my children socialize in ethnically clean societies. They can talk with Serbs, but never trust them. Do you have any insights or advice on how to approach this kind of situation?
Tatiana, do you want to go? I know that I took time before, so I want to be respectful of other voices.
It's okay. I will just reading the question again to make sure I get everything. No, I mean, this is what I think Margareta? I don't want to. Yes, Margareta. What Margareta mentioned. I mean, it's exactly the types of challenges we have, and it's exactly what, you know, sometimes for us has showed also that for a lot of young people who take maybe part in our programs or want to and stuff. And as this years go by, which is a paradox, it becomes more and more difficult for them to come out of their local communities, to come out of the maybe the shell of this family or communal backgrounds that they come from, and break through that and learn more, even get some more new perspectives of what has happened and what their future might be, or such. I don't know. I mean, as we talked about it before, we also tried to. It can be difficult working with people who've been through war in a way, or even if they were not necessarily victims or survivors of any sort of atrocity, they've lived through the war here in Bosnia, and their experiences are always unique and difficult sometimes to understand. But again, even with these type of people, where we try to find some sort of point of agreement, if that can be done. We try to speak from, to try some sort of point of view. For example, in a case that I think Margareta mentioned, we would probably try to then let her maybe talk more about her personal experience of surviving. I think it's the war in Croatia. And then if it were a group of other parents, I'm sure, and that's how it used to show to us, then, you'd probably have a parent step up maybe from another ethnical group who would say, but yeah, that happened also to our group, or that happened to the other group. And that's where you find that type of understanding. It's shown to us that more, not experience, but more, how do you say that? I don't know the word in English, but basically, yeah, more exposure. People have to other people who might have survived similar experiences, then this sort of shows it. Yesterday, as I mentioned in this workshop, we really had, teachers from all different ethnic groups, and it can be always, we don't know what we're sometimes getting ourselves into. I always have I'm always on alert in groups of these, especially of, people who probably have survived the war in Bosnia. If I'm presenting them with a content that might be challenging for some, how to approach it. But and there were discussions afterwards about the content that we presented them with. We talked specifically about the Ordinary Heroes Project, and a lot of them had questions. So where did you get the heroes, or how do you choose someone from one ethnic group that you mark as a rescuer or a survivor and such. And then we told them about our whole methodology and everything and explained, and eventually it was a content that was approached. So as long as you have enough of sort of this background, factual, sourced content that you're presenting, you should be able to slowly, again, not change the person's mind, but make them feel valued and maybe slowly open up a space for communication. Hope that helps. And yeah, I think, because we don't have a lot of time, I just wanted to say one more thing and maybe invite you guys as a community to help us out as well. BCRC is helping the Srebrenica Genocide Memorial this year to commemorate the 27th anniversary of the Srebrenica Genocide. And this year specifically, the commemoration will focus on the women experience of genocide. I think it's definitely the first time that the commemoration, the whole programming, not just the 11th of July, programming before and after, and this year will be focused on the women experience, talking about the activities of groups such as Mothers of Srebrenica, very courageous women who survived the genocide and later on fought for justice. I will share the links below. We're not necessarily asking for monetary support, but we are doing an art installation that's called the Mother's Scarf that will collect scarves and shawls of women from Bosnia, but also we're hoping from around the world, that we will then turn into an art installation to exhibit in July. So I will share the links below if you're interested to join that. Sorry for taking up so much space.
Please do. No, that's a great way to end this segment. And I only wish we had more time, but I want to be respectful to everybody on here, particularly people in Bosnia and other places where it's now 8 o'clock or so. But on behalf of Educators Institute for Human Rights and the Academy for Human Rights, thank you all for joining us for what I think was a very rich and conversation that I think is very helpful in terms of what our goal was to provide you all who are in the space of education with some tools and strategies that perhaps you can use with your students. But I also think it's important. We clearly know that I don't know if you want to say we're on the brink of a conflict, but there are signs and early warning signs that things could really go awry. And to the extent that you have an opportunity to convey this not only to your students or to your loved ones, but to the rest of the world that we haven't even talked about. How do we raise the alarm? How do we get the rest of the world focused on this amidst the situation in Ukraine and other places? This clearly needs to be on the front burner status and has needed to be on the front burner status for a long, long time. So I think that while education is critical and in the end, I think can be preventative, it does take time. But there are things that perhaps we can do right away to raise that alarm and inform people of the really precarious situation that Bosnia is in at this juncture, 26 years after the Dayton Accords. So with that being said, unless Melody, if you had some closing words, I want to thank you all. This has been a great conversation. I've learned a lot, and I also encourage you all to be in touch with the panelists and the various organizations that are involved here that can continue to provide you with some additional information and materials that maybe you can use with your students and others. So thank you.